she told me, with the crystal bowl of salad trembling in her hands. "You'll eat after everyone else." As if I were a stray cat waiting for scraps, and I put the roast into my coat and walked out. How does one compress 67 years of holding a family together into the single, brittle moment when your own child becomes a stranger? I can tell you, it snaps like the lid of an old mason jar when you try to open it for the first time in a winter you'd rather forget. That lid was our history, my coins for her schoolbooks, my small offerings of soup when she came home with wet shoes, and when it finally let go, the sound came out sharp and betrayed. I had been carrying that jar in my purse all afternoon, minding it like a small, secret hearth, because in my mind a grandmother's duty is never done. But that night, in her marble dining room with the chandeliers buzzing like indifferent bees, the jar felt heavier than the roast tucked under my arm. I suppose you should know who I am before I tell you what I did. I am called Mabel by most, a name that sounds like bread and butter in the mouth of someone who has known hunger and mended clothes. I have a face furrowed like an old map, and my hands remember stitches and small miracles, tightening a loose hem, sewing a button so the child at the table could laugh without being ashamed. I lived for years in a small rented flat with a chipped mug that reads, "World's Best Nana," in letters that have long since rubbed thin. That mug has held all the tea that softened my nights. It has soaked up oil from Sunday roasts and ringed my table with stains like a map of places I have been. There are pearls, old, a little cracked at the clasp, kept in a tissue buried beneath my sweater drawer. They are not much, but they were my mother's. And they remind me that dignity can be a small, stubborn thing. My daughter, Evelyn, she who pronounced the sentence that night with such ease, lives in a house that smells of new money. Marble floors, paintings that look at you like judges, and rooms that swallow sound. She has a husband who works in properties and a son who calls me Granny with a politeness that sounds rehearsed. They invited me, so they said, to a family gala, a celebration of her husband's new venture, a ribbon cutting on April 5th with champagne towers, and a photographer who would, I was told, capture our joy. 2 days before that gala, on April 3rd at precisely 7:15 p.m., I came to her house with my mason jar of coins, a small contribution I had saved because I had once promised to bring something to every family event. Small alcoves of love, that's what they were to me. 10 rupees here, a 20 there, sewn into the seam of my life so no one would see the stitch. I wore my best cardigan and my pearls because dignity deserved to be dressed, even if the pearls were a little dulled and the cardigan had lost some of its spring. I knocked on her door and she opened it in a robe, a stranger's robe, as though she had just shed her mother to put on a new identity. She looked at me the way one looks at a letter you did not expect to receive. Polite, measured, and with the calculation of someone who knows what a signature on a document can accomplish. "Sit in the kitchen," she said finally, as if relegating me to a minor role in a play with no heart. "You'll eat after everyone else." There it was then, the first small cut. It bled not with blood, but with that sharp feeling I had when the last piece of bread was taken from the tin. You learn, my dear listener, that wounds do not need to show to hurt. Her husband, Mr. Doyle, Mr. Connor Doyle, as his business card reads, the name embossed like a promise, smiled at me across the marble island, as if I were an old appliance, functional, but to be replaced. Their son, a boy of 27 with a voice like an announcement, offered me a forced hug that smelled of cologne and obligation. Inside my purse, the mason jar clinked as if in answer to the chorus of the household. It was full of coins and folded notes amounting to about $230,000 if you were to believe in my weird, private arithmetic. No, not that sum in real currency, but that sum in years, 70 rupee bills saved from pension increments. The small 1,000-rupee note from the funeral service I'd turned down to keep the coins for a promise. The hundreds of small offerings stacked like a staircase. Call it poet's math if you must. It's the way a life of small economies becomes an inheritance of dignity. I was given the chipped mug of tea by a maid I had seen only twice, as if introductions could be managed by a timetable. I carried the cup to a chair in the back, and when my hand trembled from cold or nerves, a tremble that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with betrayal, I almost dropped the mug. There, on that chair, I felt the weight of every afternoon I had ever spent mending, feeding, and forgiving. My pearls dug into my chest like a secret that hurt. I want you to understand. Before this, we had days of warmth. I had taught Evelyn to roast chicken when she was a little girl, her hands discovering the art of turning sugar into burnt sweetness on a Sunday afternoon. We'd sat together over hospital benches and exam papers, my mason jar taking on the role of a silent benefactor when money was thin. I had sung lullabies in the dark and ironed the shirts that later hung in the marble closet. Those memories are the rope I tied around myself. Yet they did not prevent me from being treated like a guest at a performance to which I had written the script. A day or two before the gala, I discovered a letter in my mailbox, simple envelope. No return address, only my name in a hand that recognized itself. Inside was a single sheet that said, "Durable power of attorney, pending signature. Consult your attorney." It was dated March 29th and bore a stamp suggesting it had been drafted at a firm that Karen and Connor often used. I felt nothing at that first moment. Perhaps nothing is the raw material from which a storm is made. Later, when I told Evelyn about it, she smiled and said, "Leave the legal matters to us. Mom, we'll take care of everything." There was a politeness in that smile that slid across my skin like cold water. The rising action of this evening, you will see, was not a sudden leap, but a slow accumulation, pebbles on the path until the whole walk was a landslide. First, the small exclusions. My cup said after, my chair was at the edge. Then, the whispers, faint voices behind closed doors, the clink of keys, a lock turning in the study where once she had read me a bedtime story. The first micro cliffhanger came at about the time I noticed the locked drawer in her study, one I had never seen closed in all the years I had been part of her life. I never expected what I found in that drawer. The maid, Lena, a stoop-shouldered woman whose eyes hold more stories than an old bookshop, left a plate of roast at my side. The roast smelled like home but had an air of ceremony to it, like an offering to a statue instead of to a living person. I had carved that roast for Evelyn once. My hands knew where to pierce the skin to let the juices run like small, honest rivers. But as I reached for my fork, Evelyn's face tightened and she said, "Perhaps later." I gazed at her. The room hummed. Someone laughed, and the laugh sounded as if it belonged to a different season. There is a very particular pain in being told the time you will eat. The clock on the wall read 8:03 p.m. I could have left right then, with the roast cooling under its silver dome, but I did not. Old habits, duty, the weight of promises, kept me seated like a plant rooted in its pot. I reminded myself of small things, the mason jar in my purse, the pearls in my drawer, the letter that had arrived 2 nights ago. I had not yet understood how these small things would form a pattern, like the stitches on an heirloom quilt. I must tell you about the locked box later, a little cedar chest she kept under the stairs, supposedly for photographs and baby teeth. That box had been a child's treasure once, given to me when her father passed, and I had promised to keep her memories safe. Now the box was placed in a room I could no longer enter. The people who loved me had clothed themselves in reasons and given me a polite distance. At 8:50 p.m., I excused myself to use the restroom and took that moment to walk more slowly than I had in years. Sometimes I walk like a spy, listening to the house breathe. In the corridor outside Evelyn's study, the wallpaper held a pattern of vines that had once been painted by someone with a hand that loved curves. I pressed my palm against the cool wood of the banister and caught, through the crack of a half-open door, a conversation that was not meant for me. A low voice, Connor's, said, "She signed it, right? April 1st. Another voice, silky with the precision of counsel, said, "We have everything prepared. The will be amended after the gala. Better to keep appearances until after April 5th. I pressed my ear harder, the room spinning like a plate on a string. At 8:50 p.m., I excused myself to use the restroom and took that moment to walk more slowly than I had in years. Sometimes I walk like a spy, listening to the house breathe. In the corridor outside Evelyn's study, the wallpaper held a pattern of vines that had once been painted by someone with a hand that loved curves. I pressed my palm against the cool wood of the banister and caught, through the crack of a half-open door, a conversation that was not meant for me. A low voice, Connors, said, "She signed it, right? April 1st? Another voice, silky with the precision of counsel, said, "We have everything prepared. The will be amended after the gala. Better to keep appearances until after April 5th. I pressed my ear harder, the room spinning like a plate on a string. My breath caught. I had not been aware that a will could be amended like a dress. I had only known wills as the last, solemn whisper of one's life. April 1st, 2 days before the gala. The word amended, like a blade under the tongue. I never heard the rest, because the door clicked and the corridor swallowed my presence like a tide. But those words were enough to make the mason jar in my purse rattle like a small, angry audience. I began to see the pattern in the way a house can dress itself for deception. Documents moved. Smiles sharpened. The durable power of attorney dangled like a carrot before a horse who had long stopped trusting carrots. On my way back to the dining room, I passed the hall table and saw, as if placed to mock me, an envelope bearing my name and the return address of the firm. Only this time, it held a letter stating that no legal action was needed from me. Their records showed no power granted. A neat explanation for every pain. There is a cruelty in being made to look old-fashioned and unnecessary. I sat back down. My fork stabbed at the roast, and the juices ran into a pool that reflected the chandelier like a small, burning sun. In my mind flickered a dozen flashbacks. Evelyn's first steps. The night I stayed up with her when the fever burned. The day I gave her my pearls to wear at her university interview and told her that dignity would carry her far. Those memories are not mere scenes. They are the scaffolding of a life. They rose before me then, like ghosts who had come not to haunt, but to witness. A guest leaned over and said, "Are you all right, Mabel?" As if my discomfort were a small inconvenience. I smiled, the kind of smile that has kept wars from starting at kitchen tables. "I am fine, dear," I replied. "Just tired." But tired is a word that masks storms. My hands trembled again, and I put the mason jar on the table, where someone, Evelyn perhaps, would step over it like a stone. The jar glinted under the chandelier, full of my life's patience. Later, in a quiet moment when the house's laughter swelled and then moved on, I slipped away to the guest cloakroom to check my purse. I felt like a child with a secret. I wanted to make sure the jar was still there, proof of something. It sat as I had placed it, but within my purse folded a small scrap of paper, a note in my own handwriting that I had tucked there months ago. "In case I am forgotten, do not sell the house. Keep the pearls. Call Mr. Aziz 041-555-0192. I had written his number because in 2023 I had made arrangements with an old solicitor, fearing nothing in particular, but knowing that the future can be cleverer than the present. The scrap made my chest ache. I had left myself a breadcrumb trail of dignity. When I returned to the dining room, Evelyn was speaking with a lawyer I had met only once. He held a folder and a pen that seemed to stain the air with importance. There was a paper on the table that, from where I sat, caught the light in a way that made the words shimmer. Durable Power of Attorney. Signed April 1st. I felt the room tilt. The roast before me became a symbol. I remembered the first roast I had ever made for Evelyn as a child, when she scraped the pan clean and said, with her mouth full, "Mama, you are the best." I had believed then that words were simple and true. How naive. I rose to leave. Some dignity refuses to fit in a chair, and my pearls brushed against the back of my hand like small, dutiful bells. My daughter's gaze followed me, and I could have sworn I saw in that look the precise measurement of what I meant to them now, inconvenience wrapped in a cardigan. I walked toward the door, my roast tucked beneath my coat because it felt like a relic and I could not bear to leave the memory of that meal behind. Had I known then what would follow, perhaps I would have closed the door softly and retreated into silence. But silence is a comfortable prison. I did something audacious. I lifted the silver dome and felt the warmth of the roast sink into the palm of my hand as if the heat itself were a small, honest truth. I wrapped it in the napkin and slid it beneath my coat, and no one stopped me. No one looked as if they noticed. The house hummed, full of the sound money makes when it believes itself secure. And I walked out into the night with the roast under my arm. The air was April cold and sweet with the scent of magnolia. My heart hammered like an older drum, a rhythm of own-making. I closed the door behind me, and the glass reflected a woman with pearls and a mason jar and a roast, an image of a life that will not be erased so easily. Dumas wrote that virtue is often tried by the cruelty of those nearest to it. Tonight I felt that trial begin. I did not know then that a locked drawer and a forged signature were only the smallest of the stones that would roll down toward me. I did not yet know what lay in the locked box under the stairs, or that a man named Mr. Aziz would be waiting on April 10th with papers that would make lawyers frown. But I felt, with the certainty of muscle memory, that something had been taken from me that I would have to take back. I never expected what I found in that drawer. They tell you that life calms as you grow older, that storms pass and you learn to sit them out with a cup of tea. They are wrong. My days after that night were a flurry of small uprisings, the kind that begin with a whisper and become a gale. I had the roast wrapped in a napkin like a secret and the mason jar heavy in my purse. I went home that night and laid the roast on my little table as if it were a relic, as if heat itself could keep memory from cooling. I slept poorly, not from age, but from the kind of anger that had teeth. The days that followed moved with a legalistic certainty. On April 6th at 9:40 a.m., I called Mr. Aziz because the scrap of paper in my purse whispered his name like an incantation, 041550192. He had been my solicitor once, a man both gentle and exact. He met me at his office the following morning at 10 a.m., his spectacles perched like careful birds on his nose. He read the paper I had carried, the durable power of attorney dated April 1st, and his face folded in a way I had seen only when a seam would not hold. "A forgery is a language of desperation," he said, tapping the sheet with a pen, "and desperation makes people careless." His voice was a steady thing. He placed the durable power of attorney, signed April 1st, beside another document. My last will and testament, drawn up in 2019, witnessed by 2 neighbors, and deposited at his firm. The dates glinted in the lamplight like small accusations. "There are differences," he said. "Witnesses signed in a hand that does not match your old signatures. The notary stamp is faint, as if applied later. The paper itself, look, this is not our letterhead. Someone wanted the appearance of legality but not the trouble of truth." I felt something cold slide down my spine, like the memory of a window left open in winter. "Then show me what to do," I said. And in that moment I realized my voice had become a weapon I had not used for years. He told me things in plain legal language and in plain human ones. "We can apply for a handwriting analysis," he said. "An affidavit of forgery would need to be sworn. We could seek an injunction to stop any transfer of assets, and we must notify the bank immediately. But there is a human difficulty. You must prove the signature is not yours by comparing it with known specimens. Your passport, your bank signature card, your previous will." I left his office with a folder of photocopies and my heart like a fist. I had always imagined legal talk as a thing for stately people in rooms with leather, not the place where my life would be defended. I went to my flat and pulled out the old passport that had my younger handwriting in blue ink, elegant, a hand that had taught my daughter to write her name, and I placed it beside the offending paper. The 2 signatures beside each other were like relatives who had been asked to play different parts in a lie. Someone had tried to make one look like the other, and had failed with a clumsy mimicry. There was help where I had not expected it. Lena, the maid who had slid me the roast that night like an offering, knocked on my door on April 7th at 6:30 p.m. She looked over her shoulder like a thief and then stepped in as if embarrassed by her own courage. "I have nothing to do with their money, Auntie," she whispered. "But I have eyes." She told me what she had seen. Papers moved in late hours. A man who came with a briefcase at 11 p.m. on April 2nd, and a digital camera left in the study that caught footage of someone at the desk. Someone with their back to the lens and a hand that trembled, not with age but with haste. She had copied the footage onto a small USB for me and left it in the pocket of my cardigan, where my phone now heated with the video's small, urgent light. I remember in a flashback that came like a scent of lemon soap, teaching Evelyn to tie her shoes on a park bench. Her small fingers had been clumsy, and when she finally made the loop, she had looked up at me with a gratitude so complete it restored me. How many times had I tied her back into the world with small acts? I thought of those times as I plugged the USB into my laptop. The footage was grainy but telling, a hand, a pen, and the slant of the signature, just enough to make my stomach knot. I pressed pause and looked at Lena. "Why are you helping me?" I whispered, as if the act required apology. She put her hand over mine and said, "Because this is wrong. They treat you like a thing." Her voice was small, but it carried the weight of a woman who had watched too much injustice to be indifferent. There was a tiny micro cliffhanger that night when I found a second, smaller envelope under the roast napkin. It read, "Confidential. Do not open." I never expected to find what I found inside. Mr. Aziz moved like a captain plotting a course. On April 8th at 10:15 a.m., he instructed me to obtain a certified copy of the last will and testament from his firm vault. It would be produced, he said with a solicitor's attestation, and to bring any item that bore my signature. He told me to meet a handwriting expert. We had an appointment set for April 11th at 2 p.m. I made the calls with shaking hands, each number a small knot of hope and fear. I also learned, to my shock, that Connor Doyle had moved money. A bank clerk sympathetic to my face of oldness, or perhaps knowing that honesty is currency, everywhere, told me that on April 6th a transfer had been set to execute on April 7th for the account in Evelyn's name, an amount that made my breath stop if you translated it into the language of our lives. About $230,000 worth of assets in property equity and liquid funds earmarked for upkeep and retirement. "Pending authorization," the clerk said to me at 11:30 a.m., his voice low. "We need a valid power of attorney to proceed." The loop closed. The forged durable power of attorney dated April 1st was not a piece of paper. It was a mechanism. It was the device by which my daughter's house, my name attached to it like a moth to a lamp, could be quietly moved from the small, honest ledger of family duty into the ledger of modern expediency. "You must be careful," Mr. Aziz warned me on April 9th at 9 a.m. when we met again. "There will be quiet moves. They might question your mental capacity. It is common. Someone will visit with a doctor and a form. If they manage to present a medical assessment that questions your competency, they can argue that you were not of sound mind when you signed. This is why we need strong prompt evidence. The best defense is to be prepared to show you have always been competent. Bank statements, signatures, tax forms, anything that demonstrates continuity." I had never thought of competence as a thing to be proved like a receipt. I had thought it an inner weather vane. One day you felt strong, and the next you did not. But now my very ability to feed myself, to answer a legal paper, to be trusted with a cup of tea, had become a ledger item. There was a micro cliffhanger with the arrival of a man in a gray suit who introduced himself as a physician on April 9th at 2:20 p.m., claiming he had an appointment with Evelyn to discuss family health matters. His presence at the door made my breath go thin. I opened a drawer I had not opened since the funeral of my husband and found a thin folded paper, a note in Evelyn's hand, dated March 30th, that read, "We must secure the house for the family. Mom will understand later." I held the note and felt its paper like evidence and betrayal, both. Mr. Aziz arranged for the video from the USB to be copied and sent to an independent investigator who would compare the signature on the April 1st durable power of attorney with my passport specimen and notary records. On April 10th at 10 a.m., I met Mr. Aziz again. He had news. "There is a possibility of forgery," he said cautiously. "The video suggests a person at the desk, and the notary's stamp is questionable. If we move fast, we can file an affidavit of forgery and seek an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts." We spoke in legal phrases that felt both foreign and intimately necessary. Injunction, affidavit, notary, witness statements, bank freeze. I listened like a student being taught a language that might save her life. Mr. Aziz suggested two things I did not expect. First, that I publicly confront them at the gala, by which he meant not a shouting match but a strategic revelation. And second, that I put together a small group, Lena the maid, Mr. Karim, the neighbor who had seen Evelyn sign papers years ago, and a distant cousin-in-law with knowledge of property law. He called them allies. I liked the sound of the word. There was a Dumas-like truth I found myself thinking in those days. Betrayal is the measure by which families are judged, and justice is the slow companion of the patient. A moral aside, if you will, when those we have fed draw knives, it is not the blade, but the indifference that wounds most deep. On April 11th, at 2:00 p.m., in a small office with a sun-blown window, a handwriting expert sat us down and spread the documents like flowers on a table. He examined with the seriousness of a man reading a soul. The durable power of attorney dated April 1st, my 2019 last will and testament, my passport signature from 2018, and a bundle of checks I had written over the years. He frowned, tapped, and then leaned forward. With a confidence of 95%, he said, "This signature is not consistent. The slant is different. The pressure points don't match. The formation of the M in Mabel is altered. There are tremor-like lines indicative of imitation. This is a forgery." I felt a strange joy at that pronouncement, not the joy of schadenfreude, but the relief of a wound named. They had tried to pass off a lie as law, and someone had seen the seam, a scanned email from April 2nd between a law clerk and a man at the firm used by Connor, discussing expedited amendment and keeping the client unaware. The words "keep the client unaware" were like a bell in a dark room. We filed an affidavit of forgery that day, sworn before a notary at 4 p.m., and Mr. Aziz moved to submit it to the court the following morning, seeking an interim injunction. The world of paperwork felt luminous then, strange as sunlight on the face of something long hidden. We had the expert's report. We had the video. We had the note in Evelyn's handwriting. We were constructing a net, but the opposite party is never idle. On the evening of April 11th, a thin letter arrived at my door, delivered by hand. It bore the insignia of a firm I had once respected, and the words "capacity assessment" printed in a font meant to sound formal and kind. Inside was a note from a Dr. Shah claiming that he had assessed my cognitive abilities and found them borderline, recommending a guardianship hearing. It was dated April 10th. Someone was racing me to define my mind. I felt as if a child had started a game and then, mid-play, decided to change the rules. There was another micro cliffhanger that night when Lena told me, with eyes full of half-told things, that she had seen Evelyn give a small envelope to the maid who does Mr. Doyle's laundry. "She looked like a woman paying for silence," Lena said. I decided I would not be paraded as an exhibit of incompetence. On April 12th at 8:30 a.m., I went with Mr. Aziz to the bank and demanded, with a steadiness that surprised even me, that the accounts be frozen pending the court's review. The bank, wary of liability, agreed to put a temporary hold upon receiving the affidavit of forgery and the handwriting expert's report, if only because banks prefer not to be entangled in family quarrels that lead to litigation. It felt for a moment as if the tide had turned. Word spread in the small, precise way that such things do. Evelyn called me that afternoon. Her voice was a tight string of civility. "Mom," she said, "we're only trying to protect the family. You must understand. This is messy. We can make arrangements that will keep you comfortable." I thought of the roast tucked beneath my coat that night weeks ago, the warmth of it a small relic. I thought of the mason jar and my pearls, two simple treasures that had become the axis of this conflict. My answer to her was quiet. "I understand more than you think," I said. "And I will not be made small." She hung up. There are decisions that mark a life like a seam in a coat. That night, in the kitchen, I sat with the mason jar open before me and took out a handful of coins. I did not count them in the way I had when I was younger. I counted them as promises kept. Each coin went into an envelope addressed to the allies we had assembled. Mr. Karim, who agreed to appear as a witness to long-ago documents. Lena, who would provide the camera footage under oath. Mr. Aziz, who would coordinate the filings. It was not much in money, but it was a fare to keep people in courage. Courage, like anything, sometimes needs to be purchased. A moral aside rose up then. Unbidden, when blood relatives become merchants of convenience. Strangers who choose truth become family. I will not pretend the path was not dangerous. On April 13th at 7:45 p.m., my electricity flickered and then went out for an hour. No storm, no scheduled maintenance. My phone rang at 2:20 a.m. with a number I did not recognize. The voice on the other end was an unintelligible hiss and then a click. My mailbox contained a single card. Watch your step. I folded it like a paper. Boat, and kept it in my cardigan. The climactic moment, the one I know you have been waiting for, came unexpectedly on April 14th at 11:30 a.m. I had arranged to visit Evelyn at the house under the pretense of reconciling. In truth, I wanted to see the locked box under the stairs that had held memories and perhaps the power to explain the motives that had turned my child into a stranger. I knocked and the door opened. Evelyn's face said everything and nothing. She invited me in with that practiced graciousness people use on guests they plan to forget. Sit, she said. Let us speak as a family. We spoke in the front room, and I watched the way the portraits watched us back, faces with the impassive good breeding that money polishes like marble. After a few minutes, I rose and said, Evelyn, the box under the stairs, may I see it? Her eyes narrowed with the quickness of a cat. Why, Mum? She asked. Why now? She sounded practiced, like an actress who has learned her lines. Because I want to remember, I said, and my voice was steady. Because memory is a thing that should be kept in the open. She hesitated and then led me down the corridor, her hand on the banister that I had once gripped like a mother holding a child from falling. The steps creaked with the weight of our years. She unlocked the little cedar chest with a key from her pocket, a key she had never had before in all the years I had been her mother, and opened it like someone revealing a hidden garden. Inside, the chest were photographs, the baby Evelyn with mashed peas on her face, a letter from my husband dated 1989 that spoke of love and the wish that I keep the house for the family, and like a white stone in a dark river, the original last will and testament I had signed in 2019. My heart leapt, then stumbled. What was that? Beneath the will, carefully folded, was a sheet I had never seen. An amendment to will dated April 4th with Evelyn's name as the beneficiary of certain properties and signed with my name. The signature was the same tremulous mimicry as the power of attorney. My hands shook. My mouth tasted of copper. How had this amendment gotten here? Evelyn's eyes held mine with a peculiar mixture of triumph and pleading. You kept things, she said softly, like someone reading from a script she had written. You can see, Mom, it's all there. We did what we had to. You lost control of things because you let them go. I felt a rupture inside me, like a seam pulled and unraveling. I had proof now, but proof that was dangerous. It implicated more than one hand. Who had placed this in the chest? Who had thought I would not see? At that moment in the doorway, a shape moved. It was Lena, who had come with me under the pretense of helping carry a tray. She stood like a small, stubborn pillar, and in her hand she clutched another envelope, the one I had never expected to see. She thrust it across the chest. They dropped this at the cleaners, she said. It was signed by Mr. Doyle's assistant. We opened it together. Inside was a receipt from the law firm, dated April 2nd, indicating an expedited amendment request and the name of the clerk who logged the call, someone who had used the firm's internal line at 11:18 p.m. that night. The name matched the man who had come with the briefcase in Lena's testimony. On the back of the receipt, in a hurried scrawl, were the words, Account transfer scheduled April 7th. Freeze if contested. You never expected I would find the heart of your plan, Evelyn said, and for the first time she sounded small. I felt a clarity then that was not merely legal, but moral. I had been presented with facts, not fantasies. The attempt to erase me had been deliberate. The forge had been meticulous, but not infallible. My hands unclenched. There was no going back now. A Dumas-like aside came to me then. When men and women trade in the currency of silence, they are apt to forget that silence cannot sign a paper. Truth, like floodwater finds the crack. I rose, the room spinning, and made a decision. No longer would I be the quiet woman who stitched shirts and kept her teeth for others. I would fight. I would not throw my pearls into the river of indifference. I would take the legal tools Mr. Aziz had set in motion, and I would use them like a blade of light. I reached into the cedar chest, took the original will, and tucked it inside my coat. I picked up the amendment and the forged durable power of attorney and folded them both into the pocket where I had kept the roast a few nights before. Proof and symbol bound together. I turned to Evelyn and said, with a voice that trembled only with truth, "You will not take what is mine by pretending I am no longer me." Her face went white, and for a moment I thought she would confess or break. Instead, she stepped back and smiled with the hollow triumph of someone who misjudges the heart they oppose. "Do what you must," she said. "But remember, appearing to be innocent is half the battle." I left not clandestinely this time, but with a purpose that burned. I walked out under a sky that had the bravado of a man who knows he has something to hide. The air felt new and sharp, as if the world had been washed. My phone buzzed as I walked to the gate. It was Mr. Aziz. "Court could hear our motion on April 15th, the message said. "Prepare for a hearing. Bring the originals." I had planned to bring those originals. I had not planned on the thing that was waiting for me when I reached my car. In the seat where I had stowed the roast, someone had left a small card. No handwriting, only a single word typed in bold. "Better stop." My hands closed around the steering wheel, as if bracing for a storm that had yet to arrive. I never expected what came next. The card in my car seat, "Better stop," sat in my palm like a small, stupid stone thrown at a temple. I smelled the magnolias and the spring, and thought, foolishly at first, that the world had returned to its proper order. Birds, tea, the slow clock of an old woman's hours. Then I remembered the forged signature, the amended will, the whisper of transfer that had tried to turn my life into a ledger entry. I folded the card and put it into the mason jar with a coin, as if making a poor offering to fate. That night I did not sleep for reasons that were not merely legal. I had been given a truth, and kindness will not accept being buried. The morning of April 15th arrived, with a gust of blue sky and the kind of resolve you only find when fear has been named. Mr. Aziz told me to meet him at 9 a.m. at the courthouse. The hearing was set for 10:30 a.m. The injunction to freeze the accounts and to declare the April 1st durable power of attorney null pending our trial was our point of light. I wore the pearls, though they prickled like small, watchful eyes against my throat. Lena brought the USB evidence and the printed expert report. Mr. Karim, the neighbor who had seen Evelyn sign documents in the past, came as a witness, his hands rough with the proof of honest labor. We entered the courthouse like a small army without banners. The smell of paper and leather in those halls made me feel like a soldier stepping into armor. The courtroom sat like a theater where the law performs its slow, solemn drama. People in dark robes and polished shoes moved with the certainty of those who speak for systems older than us. I felt at once tiny and enormous. The first order of business was procedural. The judge, Justice Raymond, a woman whose stern face reminded me of granite and kindness held for special causes, took our motions and glanced over the affidavit Mr. Aziz had filed. "Affidavit of forgery filed April 12th, she read. "Handwriting analysis attached, video evidence, witness statements." Response from the opposing party? A man in a dark suit rose, his smile too practiced to be sincere. "We object to the emergency nature of this," he said smoothly. "My clients maintain that the documents are valid and were executed in accordance with legal procedure. We will provide a medical report to address capacity questions." My heart lodged like a coin in my throat. The word medical had the old echo of a threat. Dr. Shaw's report, dated April 10th and calling me borderline, was in their sleeve. I watched the judge's eyes move like a bird inspecting a nest. There was, at that moment, a hum in the room that felt like the universe pressing close to listen. I remembered my husband's hands on my face the night he died, and the way he had said, "Mabel, truth is the best preservative." I told myself then that I had come this far and would not be frightened by a paper with an unkind seal. We called the handwriting expert first. He explained, with the solemnity of a priest unearthing scripture, the differences in pressure, slant, and flourish between my authentic signatures and the ones on the April papers. He showed the judge magnified images of the loops of my M and the tremulous imitation that betrayed forgery. The room, filled with the whisper of men shifting in seats, leaned in like a single body, expecting to be told a secret. Then we showed the video Lena had recorded. Grainy though it was, the frame at 11:18 p.m. on April the 2nd showed a figure at the desk, bent, pen in hand, the camera catching the angle of the wrist in a way that suggested hurry. The clerk's name on the receipt matched the internal log from the law firm. It was procedural, small, and damning in its accumulation. Facts are often not dramatic on their own. They become dramatic in number. Together, they were a net. A micro cliffhanger came when Dr. Shaw himself entered the courtroom late, his hands overcompensating with a doctor's calm. I did not expect what he would say. When he took the stand, I watched him like a hawk. He spoke of observation and borderline cognitive function, of an assessment he claimed to have conducted at 2:20 p.m. on April 10th at the request of Evelyn. His voice had the professional chill of someone explaining a lab result. Mr. Aziz asked him about his methodology, about the tests administered, about the timing. "I administered a mini mental state examination," he said. "It produced scores consistent with borderline impairment." He could have been reading from a script, because he was. "Did you meet the patient in her home?" Mr. Aziz asked. "No," he replied. "I met with Ms. Evelyn, and she brought her mother." "He's lying," Lena said aloud before I could, in a moment of rawness that surprised even me. The judge's eyes flashed. Mr. Aziz stood, and with a calmness I have learned to trust, unpacked the details that made the doctor's report narrower than a secret. He had, through a quiet inquiry, discovered that Dr. Shaw had been paid a retainer by the law firm associated with Connor Doyle on April 9th, a fact that made the air in the room taste metallic. Mr. Aziz produced bank records showing a transfer to Dr. Shaw's account on April 9th for consultation services. When confronted, the doctor's face paled. Professionals do not like to be unmasked. It was then that a strange thing happened. The judge ordered a brief recess to consider the motions. When the court returned, Dr. Shaw withdrew his assessment under the weight of the mounting evidence and the clear conflict of interest. "I regret the confusion," he said, voice small. "My report will be retracted pending investigation." The judge's gavel fell like a small, firm heart. She then granted our interim injunction. The bank accounts and the property titles in question were to remain frozen and not be transferred pending a full hearing. She ordered that the April 1st durable power of attorney and the April 4th amendment to the will be impounded and examined by the court. She also directed the police to open an inquiry into potential forgery and fraud. The room hummed like a hive disturbed. Outside the courthouse, a photographer from a small paper snapped my image, and the next morning my face sat on the front page with the headline, "Grandmother Fights Back. Alleged Forgery Rocks Elite Family." I felt suddenly larger than the parlor whispers. They had become news. For a few days, the house that had once been a theater of luxury became intolerably quiet. I returned to my flat like a general to a small camp. We waited for the police investigation to run its course. On April 20th, an officer from the Commercial Crime Unit came to Mr. Aziz's office with a warrant and a seriousness like a bell. He told us that a criminal complaint had been registered for forgery, fraud, and attempted transfer of assets. The firm's internal logs matched Lena's footage and the courier receipts. The police searched Mr. Doyle's study on April 21st and recovered a ledger containing drafts and emails that, when pieced together, suggested a deliberate scheme to effect the transfers after presenting the false documents. At 9 a.m. on April 25th, there was a hearing of another sort. The police had invited Evelyn for questioning. She arrived with Connor beside her, shoulders squared, faces pale with the strain of maintaining a performance. Under questioning, her statements changed like weather. A denial turned into an account of miscommunications, which then, under the glare of document trails and witness testimony, collapsed into silence. There is a peculiar human thing that happens when a person's craft is stripped away. Their demons show. Evelyn began to make mistakes in front of us. A contradictory email, a phone call traced to an outside line, a social media post too clearly meant to brand her as wronged. People in their world have learned to spin stories. We had learned to follow paper trails. We reached an agreement with the bank on April 28th that the frozen funds, assets amounting to approximately $230,000 in value across property equities, and liquid funds related to the house and its upkeep would remain under court. Supervision pending criminal proceedings. The judge, in a tone that left no room for mercy, ordered that no disbursements be made and that any attempt to transfer assets while under investigation could invite contempt charges and immediate seizure. It was a legal net woven with the patience of someone who knows the taste of victory earned slowly. By May 5th, the police had enough to recommend charges. The prosecutor filed for indictment on counts of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud. The community, neighbors, old friends, and even a few from Evelyn's social circle began to talk in a different way. The marble halls echoed not with the reverent hush of success, but with the footsteps of consequence. On May 12th, the television station rang my number and asked me to come on air. I agreed, because a voice needs an audience sometimes. The broadcast was intimate, a warm set, and a host who asked me gently why I had chosen to fight. I told them about the mason jar and the roast, about the pearls and the chipped mug. I spoke about small economies of love and about dignity as an heirloom. I am certain that my words, given their measure of honesty, landed where they had to. People wrote letters, some with sympathy, some with pleasant scorn for the pretensions of new money. But the thing that mattered was not their sentiment. It was that the world now watched. When those who would erase eyes are upon them, they calculate differently. The trial, if it could be called a single thing, unfolded over weeks. Evidence was argued, experts testified, and the story of the forged documents was pieced together like a quilt. The prosecution presented emails, call logs, bank transfers, and the receipt trail from the law firm. The defense, having lost the doctor's manufactured report, floundered on the shore of verifiable truth. At the center of it all was the cedar chest, the roast tucked under my coat, the mason jar of coins, and the pearls. These were not objects but witnesses. The chest had contained the original will, which validated my 2019 testament. The stealings of spring had been an attempt to rewrite not just paper but memory. If I could make one Dumas-like aside now, before the final confrontation, let it be this: when the intimate ledger of a family is turned into commerce, virtue cries for an accountant. The climax of the legal saga occurred on June 3rd, in a hearing that had the feel of a judgment day. The judge, who had watched the slow unraveling of the defense's narrative, gave a ruling that tasted like salt and bread. The April 1st durable power of attorney and the April 4th Amendment to the will were declared fraudulent and void. The court ordered the annulment of any transfers attempted under their authority and referred the matter for criminal prosecution. The judge's words were gentle and final. "Forgery," she said, "is a theft of identity and of trust. The court cannot permit such betrayal to stand." Evelyn sat in court as if someone had removed her masks one by one. There was no dramatic confession, those are the province of novels, but there was a collapse into smallness. Connor, who had once smiled like a promise, looked like a man learning to be smaller in the world. Allegations surfaced that they had intended to place houses and titles into trusts for Connor's business interests and to marginalize my claim as an elderly relative. The evidence mounted like a cold wave. There were consequences beyond the legal paperwork. The social circles that once applauded Connor and Evelyn began to distance themselves. The property management company withdrew its press release about the gala on April 5th. The photos of our family table, once used in social posts to showcase unity, were quietly scrubbed. Reputation is a currency some forget to count until it crumbles. On June 10th, the police recommended that charges be filed. On June 18th, the prosecutor formally indicted Evelyn and Connor on counts of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. They were indicted to appear in criminal court, and bail was set with conditions including restitution and legal costs. The courtroom danced with the mechanical rhythm of justice. The wheels turned, and they turned for me. At a late June hearing, Connor arrived with a box of documents that we had not expected. He presented a handwritten letter purportedly from my late husband, a letter that tried to justify their actions as being in the family's best interest, as if by invoking his name they could sanctify their deed. Mr. Aziz tore it apart with a careful cross-examination, showing the letter's provenance to be dubious, the paper inconsistent with the era, the ink modern. The attempt to manipulate my husband's memory as a shield failed. When the dust settled and the criminal matter proceeded through plea discussions and the slow machinery of law, those who had sought to erase me found themselves facing charges and the humiliations of public process. There were fines, legal costs ordered against them, and an order of restitution that required the repayment of fees and the covering of legal expenses incurred during the injunction process. The judge also placed them under probation for a period and ordered community service in a program for elder care, an injunction of a different sort that forced them to confront the lives they had tried to ignore. It may not be the sort of vengeance that makes the ink of novels darken. No swords were drawn. The justice we found was quieter, exact, and practical. The forged documents were struck down. The accounts were restored to oversight. The property remained tied to the original will. The mason jar stayed on my table, heavy with coins and with a folded card that read, "Better stop." Now, to me, a relic of the moment when a woman chose to say enough. I took back the pearls from their hiding place as if reclaiming breath. I placed them on my neck and felt something like a small throne settle into place. I arranged for the repaired lock on the cedar chest and kept the roast. Long since eaten but stored in memory as a symbol of the night, I would not be turned away from my family table. There was an emotional reckoning as well. Evelyn, in the months that followed, wrote an apology, public and private, that read like someone trying to stitch up a torn shirt with new thread. There was no excuse that would fully mend the betrayal. Apologies are mending, not replacement. We spoke once, in a room that smelled of lemon polish, and she wept with a kind of regret that is not the same as redemption. I listened. I forgave in a way that is not naive. Forgiveness for me is a tool of release, not of return. And what of Mr. Doyle? He faced his own professional consequences. Business partners left, and his firm endured internal investigations. Reputation collapsed in ways money struggles to repair. Where once there had been the gleam of projected success, there was now the sober accounting of misdeeds. They had attempted to treat me as if I were a ledger item. The law treated them as subjects of procedure. A final moral reflection, then, as Dumas might have allowed between his resentful and tender lines. Betrayal may hide in velvet, but it cannot hide from evidence. Time is a faithful ally to those who keep their records and their dignity. In the months after the storm, I changed nothing outwardly in the routines that had defined me. Tea still at 4, a walk on Sundays if the air permitted, mending shirts with hands that remembered. But inside me a small fire burned differently, no longer a furnace of wounded patience, but a lamp that would not be put out. I arranged the mason jar on my mantel and kept the roast napkin in the cedar chest as part of the family's paper trail. A small, wry memorial to the night I would not be erased. People asked me at the television studio what I had learned. I said truthfully, and with the experience of 67 years, that dignity is not a thing to be inherited passively. It is defended. I said that small acts of saving, coins in jars, a passport folded in a drawer, a note with a solicitor's number, can turn into the lifeline you hope you never need. I told them to teach their children not only to love, but to honor. If you have listened this far, you have sat with me at my table. Perhaps you are young and think these battles are for later life. Perhaps you are old and fear being overlooked. My counsel is simple and practical. Keep your papers, keep witnesses. Make friends with honest people like Mr. Aziz and brave ones like Lena. And keep your dignity close, sometimes literally, in a small chest or a mason jar. And now, because this is a story told not only to heal me, but to arm others, let me end with a small human call. If my story touched you, share it with someone who needs courage today. Leave a comment with your own story of standing up, because stories gathered together are stronger than coins in a jar. Subscribe, if you will. This heart has more evenings and more truths to share, and I would like you to be here when they come. I learned that a roast can be warmth and a roast can be armor, that pearls can be dignity and a mason jar can be a vault. I learned that betrayal by blood does not make the wound private. It makes the duty to fight public. Above all, I learned that justice, when patient and practical, can be as devastating as revenge and as sweet as Sunday tea. So take your papers, tie your pearls, and remember, when they tell you to wait until everyone has eaten, sometimes you must stand, fold the roast into your coat, and walk out, then come back with the law at your heels and the light of truth behind you.